In part 1, we covered the birth of Rare through its NES years. Here's a very quick recap. In 1982, the brothers Chris and Tim Stamper started up Ashby Computers. They went on to create games for the ZX Spectrum computer under the pseudonym Ultimate Play the Game. Their Spectrum games were innovative, critically acclaimed, and commercially successful. Eventually, the Stamper brothers saw the Famicom and knew that that was the future. They sold the Ultimate Play the Game brand to UK publisher US Gold and began to develop NES games under the name Rare, which was the name of the team that reverse engineered the Famicom at Ashby Computers. During their NES years, Rare concentrated on quantity over quality. They did have a few standouts such as Battletoads, but Rare developed a reputation of quickly turning out ports of other titles and developing uninspired licensed games based on TV shows and movies. Once Nintendo decided to make the jump to the 16-bit era, Rare found themselves a bit unprepared. Rare went ahead and invested a large amount of their NES profits into extremely expensive Silicon Graphics Inc. workstations. Now supposedly, this was such a large and expensive investment that if Rare didn't figure out a way to use these workstations to churn out a major Super Nintendo hit, the company itself could have gone under. But Rare seemed unfazed by the pressure, they were ready to innovate again, and this is part 2 of the story of Rare. The Stamper brothers and their team set out to create a fully CGI rendered game. Not a simple task considering that the Super Nintendo lacked the power to render even a few of the Silicon graphic models at once. While working with the new SGI workstations, the Rare team discovered a way to transfer photorealistic graphics, light sourcing, and advanced motion capture into the 16-bit Super Nintendo.
Let me ask you this, I heard downstairs something about ACM technology.
That's advanced computer modeling. Basically what you can do with it is it lets you create fully realistic, fully rendered 3D graphics so the person has a sense of really being there. Same computers that were used in Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, new movies like True Lies, Mask.
This process, which became known as advanced computer modeling, impressed Nintendo so much that they bought a 25% stake in the company that gradually increased to 49%. This allowed Rare to increase its number of staff from 84 people to 250. Then, Nintendo took it a step further and offered Rare the choice of using any characters from their entire catalog. The Stamper brothers requested Donkey Kong and began work on Donkey Kong Country, a game that pushed the Super Nintendo hardware well past what anyone thought was possible. In June of 1994, Donkey Kong Country made its debut at the summer CES show. At first, many attendees thought it was a 64-bit game, but it soon became apparent that they were looking at a Super Nintendo title unlike anything that they had ever seen before or thought possible. During this period, Rare started selling their games under the trademark name Rareware, though many publications still referred to them simply as Rare. Donkey Kong Country, the first game under the Rareware banner, was released in November of 1994 and went on to sell more than 8 million copies, making it the second highest selling Super Nintendo game behind Super Mario World. Donkey Kong Country received several Game of the Year awards and was followed up by 2 sequels, Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy Kong's Quest, and Donkey Kong Country 3, Diddy Kong's Double Trouble. There were also several handheld spin-offs such as the Donkey Kong Land series. The Donkey Kong franchise of games would go on to sell 30 million copies.
And that's why we've associated Nintendo 64 with only a few world-class developers.
Nintendo had previously announced that Rare would be one of the first developers to create games for the forthcoming Nintendo 64. The first game Rare was going to develop for the N64 launch was a port of their arcade hit Killer Instinct.
Available for your home in 1995, only on Nintendo Ultra 64. Killer Instinct.
Killer Instinct, a fighting game complete with its own version of fatalities, was a decidedly more adult affair and served as an answer to Mortal Kombat. Nintendo 64 didn't launch in 1995 as was initially intended, so Rare decided to convert Killer Instinct to the SNES and Game Boy instead. Both games were released in 1995 and topped the sales charts. Once again, Rare showed the world how good an SNES and Game Boy game could look. The popularity of Killer Instinct all but demanded a sequel, one that Rare was more than happy to provide. With improved graphics and 4 new characters, Killer Instinct 2 was released to arcades in early 1996. Later that same year, it was once again time for Rare and Nintendo to move on in the console front. This time, both companies were ready. When the Nintendo 64 launched later that year, Rare kept its promise and delivered a new game in the popular franchise by releasing Killer Instinct Gold for the Nintendo 64. Although KI Gold suffered from a graphical downgrade due to the compression technology used to fit the arcade version onto the smaller N64 cartridge, the development team added new modes, options, and 3D backgrounds. Killer Instinct Gold ultimately didn't replicate the commercial success of its Super Nintendo predecessor, and sadly the series went dormant. Rare's next title for the Nintendo 64 was Blast Corps. In Blast Corps, the player uses vehicles to destroy buildings in the path of a runaway nuclear missile carrier. Blast Corps received universal acclaim and received Metacritic's second highest Nintendo 64 ratings of 1997. Unfortunately, it was released with little hype and after the Christmas season. The game sold 1 million copies, which while lower than the team's expectations, still constituted a nice sleeper hit for the company. Still, Rare was off to a rocky start with their first 2 N64 offerings. While both Killer Instinct Gold and Blast Corps were well reviewed, they were commercial disappointments. With their backs against the wall again, Rare was about to deliver another masterpiece.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
The world's most famous secret agent is back.
In 1995, Nintendo acquired the rights to make a video game based on Goldeneye. Goldeneye was a reboot of sorts for the James Bond film franchise, and a major hit. Rare began developing Goldeneye as a rail shooter in the vein of Virtua Cop for the Super Nintendo, but Martin Hollis, the director and producer of the game, proposed a 3D shooting game for the Nintendo's in-development Ultra 64 console. Eventually, the Ultra 64 would become known as the Nintendo 64. With the N64's more powerful hardware, the inexperienced team working on Goldeneye made it a free-roaming first-person shooter. The team experimented with the traditional kill-everything FPS gameplay of the day. Different areas of the body would take different levels of damage, with headshots being fatal instantly. Sniper rifles could be zoomed in on targets. Stealth elements came in from using suppressed weaponry to sneaking past unsuspecting guards to removing security cameras. Interestingly enough, what became known as arguably the game's most important feature almost never even happened. The game's multiplayer mode was added late into the development process. Martin Hollis described it as a complete afterthought. The majority of the work on the multiplayer mode was done by programmer Steve Ellis, who sat in a room with all the code written for a single-player game and turned Goldeneye into a multiplayer game. The circumstances around GoldenEye's development didn't really bode well. At the time, no one had really made a console FPS that played well. The team working on GoldenEye was largely filled with first-timers, and Rare's reputation for making cheap movie tie-in games on the NES wasn't exactly helping. The fact that GoldenEye was going to be released nearly 3 years after the movie seemed like the final death knell. Instead of another disappointment, Rare delivered the first great first-person shooter on a console.
Do you know how to use one of these?
Goldeneye. Load a rumble pack and see how it feels when 007 meets N64.
GoldenEye was praised by critics and was a smashing commercial success. It was such a great success that 1 in 4 N64 owners had a copy. Rare was named Best UK Developer by BAFTA, and GoldenEye took Console Action Game of the Year, Console Game of the Year, Interactive Title of the Year, and Outstanding Achievement in Software Engineering at the 1998 Interactive Achievement Awards. Rare had reclaimed its title as a top-tier developer. Several more critical and commercial successes followed, such as Diddy Kong Racing and Banjo-Kazooie. Publicly, Rare seemed unstoppable. Behind the scenes was a different story. Tim and Chris Stamper still demanded the same level of commitment from their current employees as they did during the Spectrum days back in the 80s. The Stamper brothers were also very hands-on with all of Rare's projects, often leading to frustration of the development team members. The cracks began to show when in 1997, a group of employees left to form Eighth Wonder, a studio dedicated to developing for Sony. Things got worse from there. In the middle of the production cycle for Perfect Dark, Martin Hollis, the visionary behind GoldenEye, also left the company. Perfect Dark was eventually released to near universal critical acclaim and recognition. Its sales, however, would only reach 2 million, a quarter of what GoldenEye sold. More employees left. Despite inner turmoil, Rare still had another trick up their sleeve. Originally planned to be released as another family-friendly platformer, Conkers Quest was transformed into a game intended for a mature audience. It featured violence, profanity, and plenty of toilet humor. Literally.
I am the great mighty Pooh, and I'm going to throw my shit at you.
The newly retitled Conker's Bad Fur Day received positive reviews, but it was a commercial failure. Nintendo distanced itself from the game, never listing it or mentioning it in any of its official publications. Nintendo's lack of promotion wasn't the only problem. Conker was far outside of what you would expect to see in a mainstream title at the time, and also came in right at the end of the N64's life cycle. It was a recipe for failure. Rare's next game was going to be Dinosaur Planet, a 3D action platformer starring a couple of cute creatures as protagonists. Nintendo executive Shigeru Miyamoto was shown footage of Dinosaur Planet and requested that the game be retooled to incorporate the characters from Star Fox and released as the next installment for that franchise. The change wasn't accepted willingly by all of Dinosaur Planet's team. The plot had to be rewritten in several places to accommodate the Star Fox canon. Dinosaur Planet became Star Fox Adventures for the Nintendo GameCube. Critics enjoyed the Zelda-like gameplay, but were less than enthusiastic about the next Star Fox game being a ground-based outing instead of Star Fox's traditional flight combat genre. Sometime between Dinosaur Planet's conversion into a Star Fox game and its release, Rare's employees became aware of a private project the Stamper brothers had known about for a long time. Star Fox Adventures would be Rare's last game for the Nintendo console. The company was being sold. Thank you so much for watching part 2 of my look at Rare. Please be sure to come back in a week or two for part 3 if there isn't already a link to it in the description. If you like these kind of videos and want to see more, please be sure to check out the rest of my gaming documentaries, and hey, why not subscribe?